this is the Steve Belkin case. I'm on page 18. We're going over the financials. And so basically we'll go through these. There's a profit and loss, there's a cash flow statement and everything. One thing they talk about is, just real quick, is what they call the ad hoc programs, in which they're not projecting. I don't think at this time. We'll go through it and take a look. Basically, ad hoc is, say they decide to plan a trip to Hawaii for 3 months, a week at a time for 3 months, Spain a week at a time for 3 months, London a week at a time for 3 months. And so they've got those planned, Acapulco, and then all of a sudden they run into this group and say, hey, then that's what they've got planned for the year. And all of a sudden this group goes, hey, we got this big church that wants to go to Israel to see Jerusalem, and so that's kind of like an ad hoc program, something they weren't planning on, but something that they put together travel for, with a big group over a period of time. So that's what ad hoc means. Okay. All right. So I'm on page 19 now. This is their cost analysis. This is for a Hawaii trip. So just real quickly, the selling price per customer is $472 basically. Air, motel, meals, and transfer add up to $359. So gross profit before acquisition cost is $112.90. Acquisition costs are the cost of mailing the brochures plus a non-profit mailer, and it says there's a 50% return rate. So you're just getting half of those things back. So that cost is about $20 per passenger. Giveaways, $20 per reservation. Some of that might be, remember how they showed that they pay like the Kiwanis Club $15 for every person that signs up through the Kiwanis Club. They give $15 back. That's probably what these giveaways are. And then load factor. These planes typically hold 150 passengers. They're figuring that they'll only have a 90% load factor, which means out of the 150 they'll only get 135 people per plane. So they just figure that as an acquisition cost too. So they'll basically have empty seats, empty reservations that aren't made for this trip. So basically the acquisition costs are $60 per customer. And so your net profit is gross profit is $52.90. So your acquisition cost per customer is higher than even your gross profit. That doesn't even take into account net profit. So anyway, they're showing Hawaii, the cost per passenger, $472 basically times 135 passengers. That's a 90% load factor. These planes hold 150 people, but if they only get 90% filled, that's 135. So that just basically multiplies everything out. So the total profit is basically $52.90 times 135 passengers. And then they have this what's called options, $10 net per passenger, and that's just upselling things. You might sell them whoopee cushions on the planes or additional side trips. That's just basically upselling stuff. So they're saying that they get an extra $1,350 per plane in that. I just call it upselling. It says options include additional items such as bus tours by the charter operator. So that's what the options are. Okay, so basically for like the Hawaii, or this is overall, that was just for Hawaii, to give you an example. Oh, look at the profit margin. The gross profit margin on this trip is 11.2%. That's gross profit. Remember, so profit margin. So basically, remember, for gross profit, you just take for gross profit margin, you take the gross profit. This is per passenger in this case, but it'll be the same if you took overall. $52.90 is the gross profit per person, and they're paying $472 basically. So the gross profit is $52 divided by 472, 11.2% for Hawaii. Okay, so this is their pro forma profit and loss statement for 1974 and 75. They're estimating total sales at 276,000. Cost of sales is 2,345,000. So your gross profit is 420,803. So to get your gross profit margin, you would take 420,803 divided by this 2,766, and I think that came out to like 15% for both of these years. And that Excel spreadsheet, I'll show you. I did that on this Excel spreadsheet. Also, your profit subtract, this is your gross profit. This is like your or gross contribution. Gross profit, remember unit contribution is gross profit per unit. So gross profit total is just the number of units are people, customers in this case, times the per unit contribution. This is the unit contribution right here, times um, the total number of people that flew. Well, this is just for Hawaii, but that's an example of a unit contribution. So anyway, I don't mean to confuse you, but this is just your basic total. This is your total yearly contribution, unit contribution, which is your gross profit. You subtract your general and administrative costs, which are the fixed period costs. If you remember, that's another name for it. Fixed period costs, general and administrative, same thing. You get your profit before tax. So to get your net profit margin, you take this 169,000 and divide it by your total sales. And one of these worked out to like 6% for this year, and I think this works out to like 14%, so it goes up to 75. Earnings per share is basically your earnings, 170,000, divided by the number of shares. Remember, in this case, they were going to have 1,000,000 shares, 500,000 for Steve, 250,000 for Alan, and 250,000 to an equity investor. So you take, this is basically 170,000, right? 170,000 divided by 1,000,000 shares is 17 cents per share. 832,000 divided by 1,000,000 shares is 83 cents per share. Now when they're talking about the value of the shares, they put a 10 multiple. This is a price earnings multiple. So they just took this, multiplied times 10. And that's an arbitrary thing. You basically try to base that on what the industry average is for a price to earnings multiple. Take the earnings multiplied times the price earning multiple, and that gives you the share value. And so then they just put the number of plane flights and the number of customers. Okay? So now we go to, this is showing basically how many customers. The weird thing about this was they were saying a 90% load factor, but when you look at these planes fly with 150 people in it. They're figuring 100% load factor when they're figuring the number of customers. 750 divided by 5 is 150. 600 divided by 4 is 150. So for the flights to Hawaii, they're figuring full planes for the number of passengers, and for the ad hoc, they're figuring full planes. Now the Puerto Rico trips, they're bigger planes. They hold more people, so they're figuring 179 per plane. Anyway, so that's how they got that 6861 number that they used on the previous page for what they're predicting is their total number of passengers. But that's really not, because they figure in a 9% load factor. Anyway, so this is on page 21. Didn't have a page. Oh, there it is up there, page 21. Okay, so this is their pro forma profit and loss for 74. And again, this gets to the, if you just take a look at it, that's that 2,766,000 they had for 1974 on the previous page, and here's the net profit. They don't show the gross profit in here. They just took the revenue minus the total cost of sales, which includes the the variable cost, and no, it is. This is the total cost of sales. Then they subtracted the general and administrative. Okay, so this was the variable cost, right? The cost of sales. This is the fixed period cost. All right, and that gets you to the net profit before tax. Okay, so that's how they got those numbers. Basically, they were still at the 61, 68 numbers, but I don't know exactly how they came with these numbers. But anyway, so that's what they're projecting for 74. Okay, so these are the assumptions they made. This is on page 22. Receipts, what we talked about, deposits and final payments are only received 15 days. This is what they assumed for their thing, for cash flows, which is more conservative than what they actually get. They are saying in their cash flow statement that they're only getting money 15 days before the date of the trip, when usually they get everything within 45 days, and some that's conservative. And they assume that net operating tour receipts are received the week of the trip. Okay. Disbursements, that's for receipts. Disbursements, airlines are paid 30 days in advance, hotels are paid 30 days after the trip, meals and transfers are paid 30 days after the trip, acquisition costs are paid 30 days in advance, and that was the stuff that we looked at before, their acquisition costs, which are their marketing costs. Remember, there was three things to it: their marketing costs, plus what they had to pay as far as the mailers, the giveaways, and the load factor. So that's where the load factor comes in, actually. Okay, so we'll go back to that page. Disbursements for ad hoc programs require deposits of $10,000 30 days before departure, and then they talk about general administrative. So these are cash disbursements. These are the assumptions they made for them, and these are the ones they made for cash flow in. Okay, so here's their cash flow statements, and I'll just go over them briefly just to kind of indicate the cycle we were talking about. Okay, remember, negative means you have negative cash flow, positive means you have positive, so, and these are the disbursements per month, either positive or negative. Some are positive, some are, well, these are mostly positive. Oh no, that's total disbursements, money that they're giving out. This shows whether they have a surplus or a deficit by month. So for that month they had a deficit, for that month they had a deficit, for that month deficit, and then they had a surplus here. They obviously were getting deposits, another deficit, and then it kind of goes back and forth, and then surpluses. Basically, you look at the balance here, negative $70,000, the balance there, $263,000. So their cash flow increased by $333,000 because they were negative $70,000 there, and they got $263,000 there, right? So that's a plus $330,000, say, I'm just guesstimating, over the year, which is good. So they've got good cash flow. The one thing you do have to remember, though, is when they start up these trips, that's where they're going to have money going out. So when they start a trip, they have money going out initially because they're printing up the brochures and everything. Once they start getting money in, after they've been flying this for a while, then their cash flow improves. And then once a flight or one of these destinations ends, then they're still paying out money when they got no cash flow coming in. So up front, when they initially start like this trip to Hawaii, these months they're going to be spending more money sending out the brochures and getting the salespeople to try to pitch it to these people to take the trip, right? And then they start getting money in, about right here, say. They'll be spending money out here, so they'll have, until they get right before the trip, like 30 days or 45 days before, they won't have any cash flows. So in these months they'll have more negative cash flows starting off, and once they start getting money, and the cash flows will improve until back over here when the trip ends, their cash flows in and about right here, but they're going to be paying the airlines and the hotels and everything back out here, so the cash flows will dip again. So that's just going to be a repeated pattern. So whenever they got a new trip, they're going to have upfront costs and cash outflows, and then once they start getting deposits, they get cash inflows. And then once a trip ends, if it does, like the San Juan ends, so probably about right here, their deposits will have ended for this trip, but they still are paying the hotel rooms out in for the flights and the hotel rooms and the ground transportation out here. So it's going to affect their cash flows down here. Their cash flows dip. See, their cash flows dip. Monthly deficits. See how their cash flows dip? They've got two programs ending right here, Acapulco and San Juan. So they're getting their deposits for those last few trips right in here, but they're still paying for these trips out here. So that's why they have monthly deficits. Okay, and that's the same when a program starts. So I just want you to recognize that pattern. When they're in the middle of things, the cash flow is great. At the beginning and the end of these trips is when they get crunched on their cash flow. Okay, that's when they have more outflows than inflows. Okay, and then the last page of this whole thing, page 25, it just shows their projected profit and losses for 1974 through 1978. The one thing I want you to notice, on 1978 they got a typo. I wrote these things in. If you look on yours, it probably says $2,150.12. Well, that makes no sense when you just figure this thing out. Sales minus cost of sales gives you your gross profit, okay, which is 2,760,000. Subtract from that your general administrative expenses, then you get your net profit, which is about 2.1 million. It's 2.1 million, $2,150,121.00. So they left off the one at the end of this two on yours, and it's the same as mine, and this should have moved over a little bit. So on this Harvard case, they even have a typo. And if you divide 2,150,000 by a million shares, remember $2.15 a share. So after 5 years, they're saying this thing is worth $2.15 a share. Excuse me, that's earnings per share. It should be worth $21.50 per share. So first year they're saying $1.70 it should be worth, $8.33, 12.44, 16.74 a share, 20. So say you had warrants and they let you buy it 200,000 shares at $1 per share, say just for the first 2 years. Well, if it was worth anywhere near $8, if it was $4, you would exercise those warrants. So what would happen if you had $200,000 in warrants and they had a $250,000 loan? Well, you would buy those $200,000 shares at $1 a share. That adds cash to the company. They could pay off part of your loan. So basically, you're just converting debt into equity. See how that works? I mean, you basically give them $200,000 and you get 200,000 shares, and they give you your $200,000 loan part of your loan back, $200,000. Now you just converted debt to equity. Now with equity, it's gone. I mean, if that company goes under, you've lost it all. Whereas a loan, typically, it's collateralized, so you're taking a risk. But if it's worth even anywhere near that, if it's worth $4 a share, then there's quite a bit of equity in the company. Okay, so that was their financial statements. I'll just do a couple of things on the handouts that I sent you.